What happens when a royal walks into a morning show expecting admiration and ends up in a head-on collision with a host who refuses to play along? You're about to witness what unfolded on live television when Meghan Markle came face to face with Nate Burleson. And neither of them were prepared for what happened next. No one in the CBS This Morning studio had expected fireworks. The producers were expecting a charming, polished segment with Meghan discussing her new children's book and a mental health foundation initiative. Standard fare. Easy airtime. The energy was light at first. Gayle King offered her trademark warmth, while Tony Dokoupil read the promo line from the teleprompter. And then Nate leaned in with the first question. And everything turned. "Meghan, thank you for joining us this morning," Nate began, polite but firm. "Before we dive into the foundation, I want to ask something straight. You've talked about media trauma, privacy, mental health. All very real issues. But at what point does advocating for privacy clash with releasing documentaries, doing tell-all interviews, publishing books, all about your private life?" Meghan blinked. The smile on her face didn't move, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. "I think it's important to clarify something, Nate," she replied, voice smooth. "Sharing our story, on our terms, isn't an invasion of privacy. It's agency. We've been misrepresented for years. Sometimes setting the record straight is the only way to reclaim your voice." Nate nodded. "I hear that, but let's talk about what that actually looks like. Netflix, Spotify, Oprah, each of those was heavily publicized. Do you ever feel like maybe that much exposure undercuts the message of wanting to be left alone?" Meghan's tone chilled. "Wanting to be left alone," she repeated, "isn't the same as being silent. We're allowed to tell our truth. We're allowed to exist." "You are," Nate agreed. "So is the audience allowed to question what truth looks like when it's paired with multi-million-dollar deals and public criticism of your own family?" Gayle shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the sharp edge forming between them. Meghan leaned in, her voice firm. "I'm sorry, Nate, but are you suggesting that financial success invalidates emotional truth? That being paid for content erases lived experience?" And Nate didn't blink. "I'm saying when someone monetizes their pain, they should expect people to ask if it's about healing or about headlines." That landed hard. Meghan stared at him. "That's an unfair framing. Would you say that to a veteran writing a memoir about PTSD, or to a woman speaking out after abuse?" "I would," Nate replied calmly, "if that memoir dragged every member of their family into the dirt, named them, shamed them, and then came with a press tour." Tony coughed lightly. The studio air had changed. Gayle looked down at her notes. Meghan looked away for a beat, then back. "You're framing me as someone out for revenge. I'm someone who left an institution that nearly destroyed me, my husband, my children. We made choices to survive, and I respect survival," Nate said. "But do you take responsibility for the wreckage left behind?" "I'm sorry?" Meghan asked, eyebrows raised. "The broken relationships, the divided public, the perception that you burned down the monarchy and then sold the ashes to the highest bidder. That's not what happened. But that's how it looks." Meghan's jaw tightened. "I won't apologize for telling the truth." "Whose truth?" Nate asked, voice low now. There was silence. The camera crew was still waiting. A long, tense pause stretched between them. Meghan finally answered, "Mine," and Nate nodded slowly. "And when your truth contradicts someone else's, say, your father-in-law, your sister-in-law, your own father, are they liars? I'm not going to get into family drama here," she said sharply. "But you already did," he replied. "You did on Oprah, in your documentary, in your interviews. You've said your family failed you. The royal family was racist. The palace staff were cruel, so I'm asking, are you standing by all of that?" "I stand by my experiences, but not by the consequences." Meghan leaned forward. "What do you want me to say, Nate? That I deserved the abuse, that I should have kept quiet for decorum?" That my mental health wasn't worth protecting. I'm asking, Nate said clearly, if you understand why so many people feel you weaponized your pain. That instead of building something new, you've made a career of tearing others down. Meghan was quiet for a beat, visibly controlling her reaction. Then she smiled, too tightly. You don't know me, Nate. You've read headlines. You've watched clips. But you haven't sat across from me until today. And now you've decided who I am based on a narrative someone else wrote. I'm not deciding anything, he said. I'm asking what millions of people are thinking. Tony tried to shift the conversation, glancing toward the teleprompter, but Meghan wasn't letting it go. I know exactly what this is, she said. This isn't an interview. This is a cross-examination. You came into this ready to trap me, not hear me. I came into this ready to ask you what no one else will, Nate replied. And why is that your job? She snapped. Why is it always my integrity on trial? Where's the scrutiny for the tabloids who published lies? For the palace staff who leaked stories? For the system that let it happen? You've had your platform, Nate said. Now the public wants answers. Not sympathy. Not marketing. Just accountability. Meghan's eyes flared. Accountability. Yeah, he said. Why come here if not to take it? I came here to speak about a foundation that helps women in crisis. About children's literacy. And you turned this into a courtroom. You turned the world into one when you aired your family's private lives on television. That's enough, Gail interjected. Finally. But Meghan wasn't done. No, let's finish this, she said. You want to know why I speak out? Because I lived in a palace and felt like a prisoner. Because I was silenced. Because I was nearly destroyed by a system that didn't care if I survived. And because if I didn't speak, I might not be here at all. Her voice cracked slightly. The studio fell silent. Nate nodded once. I believe you, he said. But that doesn't mean I won't challenge you. You didn't challenge me, she said. You tried to humiliate me. I asked questions, he said. If the answers are uncomfortable, that's not on me. Meghan stood up slowly. I won't be part of this, she said. You already are, he said quietly. Gail stood too, walking toward Meghan. Maybe we take a break, she offered gently. Meghan turned to her, and for the first time, her composure cracked. I thought this was a place for truth, she said. But it's just another stage. And with that, she walked off set. No music played, no outro rolled. The crew stood frozen, and Nate sat in silence, not smug, not smiling, just watching the exit where Meghan had vanished. The silence in the studio was heavier than anything Nate had ever felt on air. Even for a former NFL player used to pressure, this was different. Gayle King stood near the edge of the stage, one hand still half, raised as if trying to stop Meghan from leaving. But the Duchess of Sussex was gone. Behind the curtains, off camera. The floor director whispered something into his headset. Nate sat quietly, staring down at the desk. The mood had shifted from charged to fractured. Tony leaned forward. We're going to take a quick break, he announced softly, eyes scanning the cameras for direction. The screen faded to black. But backstage, the real story wasn't done. Meghan was pacing in the hallway behind Studio 57, makeup touch-ups ignored, her mic still hot, unknowingly broadcasting faint audio into the studio control room. I'm not doing this, she muttered. I came here to talk about something meaningful, and instead I get ambushed by a man who thinks he's Barbara Walters. Her publicist followed quietly, hands out, calm but firm. Let's just take a breath. We can decide how we want to proceed. How we want to proceed. Meghan snapped. He questioned my integrity. He accused me of profiting off my pain. This isn't journalism. This is provocation. Meanwhile, in the studio, the team scrambled to decide whether to resume the segment, shift to pre-recorded content, or cancel Meghan's entire appearance. But Nate hadn't moved. He looked to Gayle. You want to finish it? I don't know if she will, Gail said carefully. I'm not going to yell, Nate said. But I'm not going to pretend either. 10 minutes later, the cameras came back up. There was no music, no reset, just Gail returning to her seat. We're back on CBS This Morning, she said, her voice even. Earlier, Meghan Markle stepped off set following a discussion with our colleague Nate Burleson. She's agreed to return for a closing statement. Nate didn't smile, he didn't nod. He just sat still. Then Meghan walked back out. Her walk was slower now, measured, controlled, not the glossy royal stride people remembered from her palace days. She returned to her seat without looking at Nate. I've been advised not to come back, she began, facing the camera, but I am. She turned to Nate. Not for you, not for the show, but because walking away when things get uncomfortable is exactly what people expect me to do. And Nate sat back. You're here now. Say what you came to say. Meghan took a deep breath. Her hands were on the table, fingers laced together, knuckles pale. I came here to talk about women. Women who feel invisible. Women who are silenced. Women who are told they're too loud when they speak up, too emotional when they cry, too dramatic when they demand to be heard. And I realize, sitting here, that I am one of those women. But you're also a global figure, Nate replied, his voice steady. And when you speak, millions listen. That comes with power. With power comes scrutiny. Then hold everyone to that same standard, Meghan said quickly. Hold the men who attacked me in the press. Hold the institution that leaked against me. Hold the tabloid editors who profit off hate. Why am I the only one who has to answer for surviving? Nate raised an eyebrow. Because you made survival into a brand. Meghan laughed once, bitterly. That's not what I did. But that's what it looks like, Nate said. To the viewers, to the mothers dropping their kids off at school who see your interviews while wondering how to pay for groceries. They hear you talk about trauma from inside a Montecito mansion. My trauma doesn't disappear because of my zip code, she said, voice low. No, he agreed. But your reality is different now. You chose to keep the title. You chose to stay visible. You chose the platform. So it's fair to ask, is this about service or is it about staying in the spotlight? A Gail tried to step in again. Nate. No, Meghan said suddenly. Let him finish. Let him say it. Nate didn't hesitate. Meghan, what do you actually want? Forgiveness. Validation. Silence from your critics. Or something else. Meghan didn't blink. I want the truth to stop being a luxury. That's not an answer, he said. It is, she replied. The truth has always been a weapon. Against me, against Harry, against our children. All we've ever done is try to speak it first. And yet you left behind people who now can't defend themselves, Nate said. Your father, your in-laws, your staff. You dropped bombs and never looked back. Because they were never looking at me, she snapped. They were looking through me, judging, calculating. I became a headline to them long before I told my story. Tony shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable again. And when your own story contradicts their version, Nate asked. What do we do then? Pick sides? No, Meghan said. You listen. You stop assuming that royalty makes you immune from pain, that a smile means safety, that silence means peace. And Nate looked at her closely. For the first time, his voice softened just slightly. You're not wrong, he said. But neither is the public for asking why so much of your pain gets packaged and sold. The Meghan looked away. You want an answer for everything? She whispered. But some of this is just pain. And no amount of packaging takes it away. Then she turned to the camera, her voice steady now. To every woman watching this who's been called difficult, emotional, dramatic, I see you. To anyone who's been told to smile while breaking, I hear you. You are not alone. And your story is not a scandal. She stood again. This time I am walking away. But not because I lost. Because I refused to keep performing. She exited without waiting for the segment to end. Nate watched her go. No smugness, just a flicker of thoughtfulness. Then he turned to the camera and said quietly, "She said she's not performing." I hope that's true. The screen faded to black. The screen returned from black. But this time, the studio was missing a chair. Meghan Markle was gone for good. Producers had confirmed during the break that she wouldn't return for any post, segment, wrap, ups, no photo ops, no social media shout-outs. Her team was packing up quietly in the green room. She was, for all intents and purposes, done. Gayle King exhaled slowly and addressed the camera. Before the break, Meghan Markle exited the studio after an emotionally intense discussion. "We're going to continue the conversation here at the table, with respect." Tony nodded, and context. Nate, he didn't say a word. For a long moment, he simply stared into the desk, processing. Then finally, he spoke. "I didn't come here to make headlines," Nate said. "But I'm not going to lie. What just happened deserves a real conversation." Gayle folded her hands. "So let's have it. Why push that hard?" And Nate looked up, "Because everyone else refuses to." "She wasn't on trial," Gayle said gently. "She was on television," Nate replied, "to promote a brand built on her pain. And I asked her the questions the public's been sitting with since the Netflix series dropped. That Oprah interview, the Spotify deals, the book, all of it." Tony tilted his head. "But do you believe she was lying?" "No," Nate said immediately. "I believe she was telling her version of the truth. I just think that truth deserves pressure. Tension, friction. Because if we only ever let public figures speak unchallenged, then we're just giving them a platform, not accountability." Gayle's voice softened. "You could see she was emotional." "So was I," Nate said. "But no one asked me why I was emotional." Tony jumped in. "So ask yourself, did the audience get clarity? Or just chaos?" And Nate paused, then nodded slowly. "I think they got honesty," he said. "And that's rare." But while the panel debated whether the moment had gone too far or just far enough, viewers across the country were glued to their screens. Not because Meghan had walked off, but because of the way she stood up before she did. And that's when something happened that producers hadn't expected. Meghan came back. Not to the studio. Not to the panel. But live. Through a surprise video message. Her face appeared on the monitor behind the desk, sitting in what looked like a car, somewhere in Manhattan. "Before this show ends," she began, voice calm, "I want to say one last thing." The studio fell still again. Nate turned to the screen. "Moments like today are exactly why I left the institution I did." Meghan continued. "Not because I can't handle questions, but because I've learned, over and over, that truth only matters when it fits someone else's expectations." Gayle looked stunned. The crew wasn't briefed on this. "I wasn't humiliated today," Meghan said softly. "I was provoked. I was pressed. I was challenged. But humiliation only comes when you believe you've lost. And I didn't lose. I walked away. By choice." Nate folded his arms. "But I want people to hear something clearly," Meghan added. "I am not a victim. I am not a villain. And I am not a brand. I am a woman who endured years of media assault, institutional silence, and personal betrayal. And I'm still standing." She looked into the camera. "And yes, I will keep speaking. Because staying silent isn't grace. It's fear." Then she smiled, not tight, not polished. "Just read Nate," she added. "I hope you never have to explain your pain in front of strangers for them to believe it's real." The screen cut to black again. Silence. For the first time, Nate's jaw tightened. Gayle whispered, "We did not expect that." Tony shook his head slowly. "That was powerful." And Nate nodded once, then leaned into the mic. "I stand by every question I asked, but I'll admit something. That last line, that hit." Gayle looked at him. "You regret anything?" He looked down. "Not yet." Then he looked back up. "But I think I understand her now, more than I did before." The segment closed without music, without a send-off, Just 3 anchors sitting in a room where someone had just dropped a truth bomb that no one was prepared for. Later, the footage would go viral. Clips would be dissected by body language experts, by psychologists, by public opinion forums and breakfast shows. Some would say Nate was brave. Others would say he was cruel. Some would call Meghan dramatic. Others would call her dignified. But no one, not a single viewer, would say it was forgettable because something happened in that studio that morning. Not a meltdown, not a PR disaster, but a battle for truth in real time. 2 people, 2 truths, and 1 stage, and in the end, no one left untouched.